Okay, so for today's blog, I wanted to talk about Fede and our lecture's definition of a game. It wasn't something that I found particularly totally convincing, and I just wanted to point out a few areas that I thought it could have been refined a little bit. Obviously, I'm not going to necessarily posit my own version, and of course, there is some extent to which this is all, a little bit of an academic exercise, but I wanted to explore this because I think that it says a few interesting things about games. So the first thing I would say is that he defined a game as an activity designed to provoke emotion within a ritual space. So to me, obviously, there's no controversy about it being an activity, but I think that the idea of it provoking an emotion as a qualification for being a game is a little bit questionable. And then I want to talk about ritual space. To lead, though, he talked about someone on Twitter saying, well, what about my taxes? That's an activity that provokes emotion. And it's not something that I have a lot of sympathy with, this argument. To me, it's somewhat trivial. And it's kind of the equivalent in games of saying, oh, modern art, what is it? It's just some paint. A Jackson Pollock, it's just some paint on a canvas. It doesn't look like a real thing. And it's kind of avoiding the idea that there's a difference between art and activities. So to me, this goes back to Marcel Duchamp. Duchamp created a urinal, which was, he got it commissioned by an actual urinal maker, and then he put it out. I think it was in a competition under somebody else's name, and it was only when it started to be attributed to him that it became very famous. And in many ways, this kind of underpins the conversation about art in the 20th century, which is what separates art from artifacts in the world, what separates Duchamp's urinal from everybody else's, and also, in this case, what separates games from regular activities that we do every day, such as doing our taxes or doing the dishwasher. So for Fede, this would be something that provokes an emotional response. Now, to me, that's definitely a good start, but it's not enough because there are many things that, like they said, provoke emotional responses, and the closest analog would probably be art. And this kind of ties in with the second thing we says, which is about it existing in a ritual space. Now, games do exist in ritual spaces to some extent. If you think about the followers of football, tribes of fans often engage in a certain sort of ritualistic behavior. But of course, there are many things that are ritualistic as well, not least emotion, not emotion, a religion, which provokes emotion as well. So this is quite an interesting thing. And to my mind, this definition doesn't serve so much to sort of pin down games as more to sort of seek to elevate it. It's to say games are not trivial because they can provoke emotion and because they're part of an important societal ritual. Both true, but together doesn't really make a game. It more seeks to kind of put games up and make a lady of them and put them on a plane with things which are considered more societally important. So I think there are a couple of things, though, which need to go into games and at least need to be considered, if not considered, complete benchmarks of their inclusion. And I think the first thing is contrivance. So Ian Bogost talks about this a fair bit, and he says that the phrase golf is a perfect waste of a good walk. And the idea is that games are ultimately contrived. The things we do in them are arbitrary and mean nothing. Football, the goal is to get the ball into the net, again, completely arbitrary. And also we can only use our feet, which is an extraordinary contrivance. And so it's kind of those contrivances which separate any sort of activity which we might seek to accomplish efficiently, like doing the dishes or doing our taxes, from a game which has these unnecessary obstacles. And in fact, Bogost also points out a philosopher who says that games really are the voluntary overcoming of unnecessary obstacles. And then I think the second thing, more than the provocation of emotion, is the chance of mastery through play. So there are lots of things in life which we can play or play with which aren't games. So for instance, musical instruments. You can also play with your steering wheel. It has a certain amount of play. But I think the idea in games is that there's a certain level of mastery that can come through play. And I don't think that we can discount the attraction of mastery in the playing and the creation of games. So for instance, there would be some games that are so easy as mastery is not very interesting. It might make them not games at all. It might be ones that it's so hard or abstruse that no one's going to play it. And somewhere in between, these contrivances allow for a certain level of limitation, which also allow for a degree of mastery. You can practice a game until you get good at it. And this goes even for games that don't necessarily have these kind of win conditions. You could gain some mastery of a game by exploring all of its lore or all of its stories, or really getting something out of it. You could have a sort of intellectual and spiritual attainment with a game. So it's not all about just winning in a sort of points-based sort of thing. And I think between the two of those, the contrivance and the mastery, you're starting to get closer to what a game might be. So let's go back to that doing the taxes thing. So we're doing our taxes, but we want to do it in a way that we're going to be as good as possible for ourselves. And also maybe we're going to try and do it as fast as possible or as cleanly as possible. Well, suddenly you're getting closer to what a game might be made out of that. And you can see that there's a game emerging out of the mist. So is this provoking emotion? Not necessarily, although mastery and play does tend to provoke emotions. And is it a ritualistic space? Sort of. It can be ritualistic, but I think it's all about contrivance. So setting up of these obstacles, setting up of these rules and these spaces, but ultimately that's to allow for a limited sense of mastery, right? So with my game Family, it's kind of genealogical game, and genealogy obviously isn't a game for a lot of people, but people did find it a compelling game, firstly because of the way that it was contrived to hide information and also to only reveal certain information after you'd accomplished things. And then also the master it gave you of understanding the world. And Alice Bell in Rock, Paper, Shotgun and John Walker in Buried Treasures talk about this, about the pleasure of learning about the people and feeling that you understand something. So kind of overall, my feeling is that I find Fede's qualification of games a little bit lacking. It's not to my taste, and I suggest that really in order to have a game you need to have the certain contrivances that separate it from activity, but also the possibility for mastery, which puts it aside on its own. So that's my take on things. Hope you enjoyed, and see you next time.